another informative edition of the Spotlight here on Community Channel 6. I'm your host, Sherry Ann Noel. And in the Spotlight, we feature Mr. John Rollow. He is a visually impaired gentleman, and he's also an activist for the visually impaired. Most of you on seeing him on television would have noticed him walking through the streets of St. George's on a number of occasions. And today he's on the Spotlight to speak to us about the United Nations Convention on the Rights of People Living with Disabilities and some other pertinent information. So at this time, I'd like to go over to Mr. Rollow, who would just give you just a brief background on John Rollow. Mr. Rollow? Thank you very much, Ms. Noel. Good morning. Greetings to your listening audience out there. I hope I treat them sufficiently today. I have chosen to ask your permission for this opportunity because I think it is extremely essential that we sort of, and I speak of we, although it is basically me alone speaking on the matter, that we should step up the pressure, and I am very meticulous with my words, the pressure on the state to comply with international law as it relates to, as they quote it, persons with disabilities. It has been taken in this here country that the issues related to persons with disabilities is what people interpret to be a charity issue, an issue of philanthropism. But it really isn't. The issues related to persons with disabilities, and I will use the word persons for the purpose of the law, is a human rights issue. And it is not John Rollow has been inventing anything over the months that I've been talking on the radio and to call in programs and so. It's because it's been established by the United Nations, and our state, the state of Grenada, has refused to take action. And for this reason, I have thought it fit to take this to a new level, a level of building even greater awareness on matters related to persons with disabilities or living with disabilities in our beautiful Triangle state. Okay, so before, I know you're going to speak specifically to some different areas as outlined by the Convention of the United Nations. Correct. But you said a little bit that, you know, you want the state to take responsibility. Aren't they now giving assistance, or haven't they been giving assistance over the years to persons living with physical disability? Very interesting question. Yes, the state has been given some assistance to certain private businesses, and mark my word, private businesses, to do certain things for persons with disability, living with disabilities in the country. But the question is, have these efforts been successful? And the answer is no. Okay. You see, the issue is not for private people. Not that they can't participate. Of course they can, as Grenadians in organized groups and so on, representing persons with disabilities. But the issue is primarily that of the state, as we would demonstrate in the convention. The state has certain obligations. And of course, it's been operating for 20-something years now by the whims and fancies of a few. But is this way it's supposed to be? No, it has to be done directed and supervised by the state because it is their baby. We demonstrate that. Okay, so let's speak a little now to some of the preambles. Sorry, give me a few of the excerpts as it relates to information outlined by the United Nations. The first excerpt I'll play, which is about 2 minutes and a couple seconds, is just a part of the vast and very long preamble. But it sets out to establish something extremely important that the nation should understand, if you would permit me.
Convention follows decades of work by the United Nations to change attitudes and approaches to persons with disabilities. It takes a new height, the movement from viewing persons with disabilities as objects of charity, medical treatment and social protection towards viewing persons with disabilities as subjects with rights who are capable of claiming those rights and making decisions for their lives based on their free and informed consent, as well as being active members of society. The Convention is intended as a human rights instrument with an explicit social development dimension. It adopts a broad categorization of persons with disabilities and reaffirms that all persons with all types of disabilities must enjoy all human rights and fundamental freedoms. It clarifies and qualifies how all categories of rights apply to persons with disabilities and identifies areas where adaptations have been made for persons with disabilities to effectively exercise their rights and areas where their right has been violated and where protection of rights must be reinforced.
Okay, Mr. Rollow, with that first bit of the excerpt that you just played, I just want to go a bit. I know that you're here on a personal basis, but in terms of some of the information that was outlined there, we know that we have the GNCD. Have you ever been a part of them in terms of, based on what is outlined there?
The truth is, the GNCD Incorporated, because we can't leave that part of the name out,
okay,
is a private business entity involved in other things. They may seem to be the representative of persons with disabilities in this here country, or the disabled, which they call. This is a road I did not really want to go down, but you raise it, so let me just touch on it. This organization doesn't have any mandate to be any type of umbrella organization to represent people with disabilities in Grenada. They do not have it because it's a private business entity number 169 of the Supreme Court Registry of Grenada and the Business Registration Act involved in real estate business. This is a fact. I have the documents.
Okay.
So I'd rather not go down that road. And only to say that I attempted to get into that organization when I realized that it was a private business, and I would notice that they were rebuffing me and treating me with scornful disdain. I backed off completely.
Okay, so what is the plan? Because you told me earlier that you're an activist for the visually impaired. I know that we have the Society for the Blind.
Yes.
I'm not too certain how active is the organization, but how do you plan in executing your job as the activist to get this information that you just shared with us and other information to the relevant authorities to ensure that, well, something will happen in the not too distant future?
Yes, very good question, Ms. Noel. Now, absolutely no doubt there is that as an individual voice, it will be one in the wilderness. In unity there is strength. So I have affiliated myself with the Grenada Society of the Friends of the Blind.
Okay.
And as a matter of fact, you know, what a coincidence. Only yesterday evening there was a meeting and there was a new management structure, executive put into place.
Okay.
And very soon, when we speak again, I just maybe because I have been elected PRO.
Okay. Okay.
And so the next time I speak,
you'll be speaking in that capacity.
I may be speaking in that capacity. That's a very good question that you asked, and it's quite pertinent. Only yesterday evening, I must indeed say, because it is important that we speak as groups, so that the state, through the current government, understand that it's not simply John Rollow that is speaking. Of course, my message is true. What I say is true. And I know what I'm speaking about. But of course, when you speak as an organized body, representative of more than one person, it certainly has to make a greater difference. So I'm happy that you asked that question.
Okay. So if we're to move along, what would you say are some of the guiding principles that are outlined in the convention that are not actually practiced or put into force in Grenada, notwithstanding the fact that Grenada has signed on to that convention?
That's a very interesting question again. Grenada chose to sign on to a convention which was put into force on the 3rd of May 2008. So the 3rd of May, next Friday, would make it exactly 5 years, and Grenada only chose to sign on the 12th of July 2010. What they haven't done is to ratify, because signing is just saying, well, I agree that I sat and spoke about this. If you ratify the convention, you say, look, I agree, then you would be saying that I agree to undertake what is established here. But for whatever reason, the state fails to do it, refuses to do that.
So it has not been ratified?
It has not been ratified. That means the state has not agreed to date to do what the convention says. And mind you, the convention is for immediate application. It is stipulated there too. Immediate application. But for whatever reason, the state of Grenada refuses. So far, more than 130 countries have ratified this convention, all around us, save and except a few. Why aren't we? That's the question. The principles, which I'll play another short voiced excerpt of, are 8, basically.
Okay.
And it's short, so we just listen to it.
In principles of the convention, there are 8 guiding principles that underline the convention and each one of its specific articles. A. Respect for inherent dignity, individual autonomy, including the freedom to make one's own choices and independence of persons. B. Non-discrimination. C. Full and effective participation and inclusion in society. D. Respect for difference and acceptance of persons with disabilities as part of human diversity and humanity. E. Equality and opportunity. F. Accessibility. G. Equality between men and women. And H. Respect for the evolving capacities of children with disabilities and respect for the right of children with disabilities to preserve their identities.
That's a whole lot of food for thought there.
Yes, ma'am. And if we look at what's happening in Grenada currently, it's all on the contrary. Discrimination, left, right, and center. Accessibility, look at my mouth right now. Yesterday afternoon, I collided with a truck on the sidewalk with the mirror extended to the front. No one was there, so I can't claim on anybody. The sidewalk belongs to me, as established by, that's where I guide myself. Time and time again, the police breaks the law.
Okay.
Respect for diversity. Equal opportunities. I can't get a job because I am blind. It should never be. They call us all names. They call people, for instance, with disabilities. Only yesterday morning, this came out on a program with Barbara Lindo on another program, on another radio show there. They call persons with mental illnesses imbeciles in a law of Grenada. The National Insurance Scheme has within its founding laws, they refer to people, living people, as invalids. This is most denigrating. This is most humiliating, derogative, demeaning, insulting. These things have to be moved away from our language when we refer to people with disability.
So is it that with the with the ratification of the convention and so forth, would it take into consideration all these things that
All
you just
these
mentioned?
things, because the state would then have to drop laws, enact laws in the nation that would cover the international law. It would be guided by the international law. Because international law, as you would hear in another component later on, supersedes sometimes national laws on matters related to human rights. This is a human rights issue, nothing else.
Okay. So as you mentioned, it's a human rights issue. Have you ever spoken or had dialogue with any member that is within the human rights organization here to plead in your cause?
There is a human rights organization, but that too is a bit dormant. I've had conversation with Mr. Milton Coy, who holds well, he used to, I do not know still if he does still.
Okay.
But I must indeed say that organization is a bit dormant, you know. It lacks vibrancy to represent really human rights, because if I recall well, the last time I heard matters related to human rights in a serious way in Grenada was during the revolution, when some politicians got on the other side of the law against the revolutionary laws and so on. And there were human rights then, but now there aren't. You know, so it's because of a deficiency in the activism, really, for human. Because this issue here is fundamentally, essentially human rights. That is why I claim that if the state continues to deny ratifying the convention systematically and vilely, they're continuing to violate my and all other persons within the nation's human rights. Within the nation, yes, human rights. Yes.
So we have a fairly new government in place now. Have you begun the process of trying to meet with them again to air your views? Because you said you were the activist. As
yes.
the Lone Ranger that you be.
Lone Ranger, yes. I must indeed say that I challenged the newly appointed Prime Minister one night on a television program, and he asked me then to go in and see. That was the night he let it loose. He let the cat out of the bag that the Minister of Social Development would have been a woman. Okay. And I must indeed say, within 3 days of establishing an appointment with her, she sat down with me 15 to 20 minutes, and I spoke to her just as I'm speaking to you on these matters.
Okay.
And of course, I am not rushing the government per se, you see. But the thing is that if we don't talk, it will become dormant.
Okay.
You see?
You
and
have
I don't
to
want
keep
it to
it
become.
fresh.
I have to keep it there so that they know that this is something that is expected, and it would cost the state nothing really to ratify the convention. And no one expects that if they ratify the convention tomorrow that everything can take place. There are things in the convention that may take 10 years or more.
Okay.
You understand me? But at least pay some respect to the people and let them know that we're thinking about you in some way. We form part of the society. We equally Grenadians as anybody else. And we cannot continue to shut in, shut up, shut down, and shut out people with disabilities because of their condition and their diversity. And that is what has happened in this country, and that has to end.
Okay. So before, I know, well, checking on time, we have just about 10 minutes left, but before you play your last little excerpt, would you be giving the Honorable Minister of Social Development a timeline to see some results? Or
no, I cannot establish timeline.
In terms of, based on the discussion that you had with her?
Yes, why of course. As a matter of fact, you know, I think that the government has to, you know, we say normally get its feet wet, so to speak.
Okay.
You know, they had to set in themselves and so on. But they must understand that this is a matter they have to address as soon as possible.
Okay.
You know, and at least declare that they're prepared to establish a national system, because in the national system for the integral attention of people with disabilities, you have to do certain things first. We have to work on the awareness of the people. People have to be aware. That is no invention of mine. That is a law, okay. International law. And we have to give the government a chance. I would say by the end of the year, into the new year and so on, we need to see something happening.
Okay, so what we're going to do before our time gets out is that you said you had a last little
Yes,
piece
just
that
one
you
short part here.
Yeah, okay.
No, this here is Article 4 of the Convention. And while we are at that, I would like to invite the Grenadian public to let their children who are pretty technologically savvy
Okay.
to get into the internet, United Nations webpage, un.org, and type in the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, or you can even type in the word enable, and that would lead you to the convention. Study the convention. Talk to it. Talk about it to your friends, peers, your relatives, at school, all over. It is essential. Just as we have a convention on the rights of children, just as we have a convention on the rights of battered women, and other conventions, the group of people with disabilities in the nation is equally vulnerable.
Okay.
And there is a convention. So let us do it too.
Okay, so let's just hear that piece there.
So let's play this last part here. The last part here is the first subsection of Article 4. I would play item A and B. Of course, there are 9 items, but because
Based
we don't
on
have time and
yes,
so on, I'll just play these 2 to show that the United Nations calling upon the states, state parties, they refer to them, with immediate application to take the necessary measures to enact laws, legislative and other measures to correct the ills against persons with disabilities.
Okay.
Article 4, General Obligation. Number 1, states, parties undertake to ensure and promote the full realization of all human rights and fundamental freedoms for all persons with disabilities without discrimination of any kind on the basis of disability. To this end, state parties undertake A. To adopt all appropriate legislative, administrative, and other measures for the implementation of the rights recognized in the present convention. B. To take all appropriate measures, including legislation, to modify or abolish existing laws, regulations, customs, and practices that constitute discrimination against persons with disabilities.
Okay, so that was sections of it.
Yeah, these are just 2 items. There are various items. They're meant much more.
Okay.
But of time constraints and so on. But bit by bit and so on, I hope to be able to advance. But I am inviting the people of this nation, the general population, to get involved in this. This is a human rights issue. We're not asking any favors of the state. The state has a duty, moral obligation to do what they're expected to do according to, they must, in other words, they have to align themselves with international law, adhere to the international law, if we're part of this quote-unquote international community, and we live in a democracy, and we live in a state where there is equality, justice, inclusion, in other words, demonstrate it.
Okay, so before we wrap up, I just want to ask you, in terms of persons who are visually impaired, have you been having dialogue, one-on-one dialogue with your peers?
Indeed, yes. As a matter of
letting
fact,
them know exactly what you,
clearly,
the information that you have and so forth?
That's correct. And like as I said, I'm affiliated with the Society of the Friends of the Blind. And I have my aspiration. Before I die, I have to see in this country, sooner or later, an institute for the blind, where blind people from the cradle to the grave can enter and learn everything that they have to learn to enhance their dignity and their living standard.
Okay.
Where they would learn where to be rehabilitated in case of persons who would have acquired the disability. And of course, with those who have the disability of a congenital nature, in other words, being born with it, that they would get initial training to prepare. Because in the world today, blind people do things. You might have gone, I've never been to the United States, but you might have been there for some time. I don't know, Canada, wherever. You see how they treat you see them with dogs, of course, that's an expensive exercise. But you take them into I move around St. George's not because I'm any magician. I can't see a shadow. But there are skills that you learn. And if I learned it, why can't others? They have no access to it. They have no opportunities, and what the state has to do is to create this. And this is my struggle.
And you are willing to teach others what you've learned.
Of course. That's what I want to do. I'm used to serving Grenada, and I want to continue. But no, you see, if the convention comes into play, a big business will fall apart. That's why they're rejecting it. The business they have set up over the 26 years will collapse if the convention comes into play and the state takes up its due responsibility. This is why they reject it.
Okay. Well, Mr. Rollow, I'd like to thank you very much for coming here on the spotlight with us.
And I certainly do appreciate it.
Yes, and enlightening us on all the different aspects of the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons Living with Disability. And I hope that you would reach far, that the government would at least hear your cry, hear the call, and have it ratified in the not too distant future, so that we can see more happening for persons living with disability. To those of you at home, I'd like to thank you very much for viewing, and as Mr. Rollow said, please check out the website and get yourselves more informed.
Yes. Well, I do thank you very much. Certainly it's been a pleasure and an honor for me, as a matter of fact, Ms. Noel. And hoping that the people and so on would see this as the first lesson, directly beginning to build full awareness of the plight and status, let's just say it this way, of persons living with visual impairment. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rollow, and thank you very much to our viewing audience who have been viewing the Spotlight here with us. I'm Sherry and Noel. Join us again next time for another informative program.